Soulseek Saga is the best Suicide Boys EP, and that's a fact. And with that being said, let's begin. Coming up from New Orleans, Louisiana. I know it's New Orleans, but I didn't like how that sounds. The Suicide Boys are a new age rap duo, best known for their dark trap beats and their satanic edgelord themes. You know what I'm talking about. Inspired by the 90s Memphis rap scene. You'll often hear their name in the same breath as other icons such as Lil Peep, XXX, Tentacion, and Bones, all of which rose to fame during the emo rap era of the mid-2010s, the SoundCloud days. Before the mainstream success story that we currently know the Suicide Boys as today, there was Scott Anthony Archignon Jr., also known as Scrim, and his cousin, Aristos Petru, or Ruby the Cherry. Not a chance I pronounce either of their names correctly, so they're gonna be Scrim and Ruby from here on out. Born and raised in the suburbs, New Orleans is where Scrim and Ruby spent most of their days. They essentially grew up next door to each other, with Scrim's hometown of Marrero, Louisiana being just 10 miles away from Metairie, where Ruby was raised. Not only did they grow up in similar places, but also in similar circumstances, as they both describe their teen years as troubled in interviews. They don't really go into much detail though. Despite those similarities, the boys actually led very different lives.
Aristos was musically gifted at a young age, learning to play the violin and drums at age 10. He would continue developing his musical talents throughout his rebellious teen years, eventually joining a punk rock band named the Vapo Rats as their drummer. Scott, on the other hand, pursued a career DJing, even landing a couple gigs at his local college.
However, dissatisfied with the lack of progress in his DJing career, Scrim decided to buy a laptop with the money he made selling drugs. After he learned that hip-hop artist T-Pain, who famously rhymed mansion with Wisconsin,
put you in a mansion somewhere in Wisconsin,
did the same thing, as in he made beats on a laptop instead of on a DJ thingy.
Bro, can you imagine being a fucking fan of T-Pain? Nah, come on.
Shortly following Scrim's decision to leave his DJing career behind, Ruby left the punk scene, also dissatisfied with the lack of success he was having. The two cousins, now in their 20s, formed a suicide pact. Unhappy with the lack of direction in their lives, they had until they were 30 to make a name for themselves, otherwise they would both commit suicide. And Scrim was very blunt about it. He said in an interview,
there's no second option. There's like no plan B. If this doesn't happen by the time I'm fucking 30, and that's pushing it. If this doesn't happen by the time I'm 30, like I'm blowing my head off.
And with that suicide pact, the Suicide Boys were formed. At least the general idea of the Suicide Boys was formed. They didn't actually go by the name Suicide Boys for another 2 years, instead using their individual stage names. So Scrim went by Scrim, and Ruby actually went by Enough the Snow Leopard. After this, the boys got straight to work, with Scrim producing beats while also encouraging Ruby to come out of his shell, as Ruby was self-conscious about his early lyricism.
Never rap. He used me like when we started.
Between 2012 and 2014, the boys would drop several mixtapes together under their respective stage names, amassing several thousands of followers on SoundCloud. It wasn't until Kill Yourself Part 1, The Suicide Saga, dropping on July 14, 2014, that they would use the name they are now known as, the Suicide Boys. In the following 6 months, Scrim and Ruby would drop 7 additional EPs under the Suicide Boys moniker. The journey leading up to this point hadn't been easy for the boys, with Ruby being forced to work at his father's restaurant, a job he didn't enjoy, arising from an ultimatum his father gave him after being arrested twice when he was 16. Scrim was also battling his own demons, namely an addiction to heroin and prescription drugs. This, combined with the fact that the boys hadn't found the success they were looking for yet, led them both to deep depression. It was from this combination of the depression they were dealing with and general insecurity with their music career that on January 14, 2015, part 9 of the Suicide Story spawned, the Soul Seek Saga.
Head down, smoking on the blunt. Smoking the fucking cigarette to fuck up with my lungs. Fuck me, you hung yourself from the top bunk, bitch. You ain't even hiding up. Touch a Glock, boy, bitch, I put it.
Oh, left me, don't give a fuck. Car broke down, don't give a fuck. Chillin' with Audi, don't give a fuck. Her hair real sloppy, don't give a fuck. Long as I fucking catch my nut, maybe something in her butt that's a fucking duck. Eating Popeyes, lemonade, not real shit, just man and made.
To soul seek or soul search is to take the time, whether it be a couple minutes before you fall asleep or a whole ass lifetime, to reflect on the meaning of self, what your convictions are, your motivations, fears, hopes, and the true importance of all of these in the grand scheme of things. And that's exactly what the boys do in this tape. They were at a metaphorical crossroads in their life. Should they keep going or should they give up and fulfill their pact? This tape's an unfiltered, raw look into the mind of two people at their darkest point and how they eventually came out on the other side. With the Suicide Boys' personal journey being relatable to so many people, I mean, we've all gone through wanting something and not getting it. It makes the Soul Seek Saga one of the most emotionally compelling projects that Duo has ever released, in my opinion. The Soul Seek Saga features 3 songs, as is typical for most of the tapes before it, with longing, soulful jazz samples which exude a nostalgic and almost sad atmosphere, tying in perfectly with the content of the lyrics and the underlying story this EP plays out over the 3 songs. Although not confirmed by the Suicide Boys, I believe there is a loose narrative in this album which you can follow along to if you listen to it in a certain order.
Broke down, don't give a fuck. Chillin' with Audi, don't give a fuck. Her hair real sloppy, don't give a fuck. Long as I fucking catch my nut, maybe something in her butt.
The second song on the Soul Seek track list is the first part of our narrative. In this song, the boys describe a typical day in their respective cycles of self-destruction and how each one of them copes with it. Scrim chooses to cope by railing directly against his problems. Car broke down, I don't give a fuck. Ho left me, I don't give a fuck. It shows a side of Scrim that is affected by these issues, but instead of admitting it, he'll simply put up this front, I don't give a fuck. Ruby, on the other hand, chooses not to fight his problems directly, simply accepting them as consequences of his own mental state. He believes these things are beyond his control, thus trying to deal with them would be a pointless endeavor. It's best to just ignore them. This is how people with depressive tendencies will typically deal with their issues. They'll either bottle them up like Scrim and let them eat away at themselves from the inside, or let the problems overwhelm them and consume them like Ruby does.
Down, smoking on the blunt. Smoking the fucking cigarette to fuck up with my lungs. Fuck me, you hung yourself from the top bunk.
The final song on the Soul Seek track list, but the second song in our narrative, Hair. The previous song looked at how the boys learned to cope with their depression. Hair describes their true feelings without the facades. They're fucking, oh baby, let me caress you sweetly, sweetie. Oh. A peek behind the curtain, if you will. Ruby begins his verse with the phrase, to let one's hair down means to drop all reservations and inhibitions, to speak their mind freely. With this in mind, Ruby then goes on describing his wishes to end his own life, both passively and directly, with lyrics such as,
Smoking the fucking cigarette to fuck up with my lungs. Fuck
and
ain't even hiding up. Touch a Glock, boy, bitch, I put it to my skull.
Ruby, without his don't give a fuck attitude, is currently consumed by his depression and wants to end his own life. But it seems that he doesn't believe this is truly the correct solution, as later in his verse he says,
And the box, picking the locks.
implying that although he's rotting in the box right now, or literally being consumed by his mental state, he is breaking the locks and trying to free himself. Scrim, conversely, begins his verse with,
Hair up, purple double cup, bodies in the trunk.
the act of someone putting their hair up is akin to someone rolling up their sleeves. Oh yeah, bro, I just rolled up my sleeves in real life. I'm ready, bro. I'll fucking kill you, bitch. It shows someone is about to put in work. Shawty put her hair back. She better fucking suck my dick. Yeah. Scrim wakes up, puts his hair up, and gets to work fighting his demons, without truly dealing with them. This takes a toll on Scrim as described in the lyric.
Suicide, take my own life. Every night I die, every night I'm high. Another depressing ass alibi.
Ironically, most of Scrim's issues are caused by his drug use, yet he uses his drugs to cope with them, perfectly encapsulating the repeat cycle of addiction. Unlike in Ruby's verse, Scrim doesn't see a way out. He's not breaking the locks, instead ending his verse with,
And if this is what it seems, I'm hollering, fuck you.
A final defiance in the face of him actually going out of his way to deal with the cause of these issues, which is obviously his drug use.
And now I'm sitting on the couch, house is like a drought. No one fucking in it, fuck my life, I'm fucking finished. I let my soul diminish if I had.
And finally, we end our narrative with the first song on the Soulseek track list, Harvest Moon. A harvest moon is symbolic of good fortune. It allows farmers more time to harvest the fruits of their labor, which explains what the final act of the Soulseek story is about. The boys have fought their demons, accepted their problems, and are now finally able to see the results of their toil, for better or for worse. Unfortunately, things don't always have a happy ending.
Scrim begins this song with a somber verse describing himself as
Just a young gift walking with a limp.
his life is a loop, an endless cycle of depression caused by his drug use, which not only affects him mentally but also physically. While physically alive, Scrim in this song considers himself already dead. He goes on to finish his verse and thus his story with,
Now I'm sitting on the couch, house is like a drought. No one fucking in it, fuck my life, I'm fucking finished. I let my soul diminish if I hadn't fucking sold it. Promise everything, that's how the devil fucking wrote it.
Ruby, on the other hand, has a slightly more positive outlook on his situation, though it is clear he isn't still completely free of his depression. More specifically, he isn't happy with the direction his music career is going in, as shown in this lyric.
Back up another track and subtract that from my fucking stack of scraps. Me and Slout the fucking whack, and I hate the fact that we rap. I just wanna find the gaps so I can fill it with my sap. Give a fuck about the cash, I just want the ash and laugh it off whenever I be thinking about the past.
He isn't proud of his work. In fact, as we mentioned before, he's actually embarrassed of it. He just throws together a verse and calls it a day, despite the fact that it does pay him. Maybe not super well, but money is money. What he truly wants is to find a gap that isn't filled. In other words, he wants to find an open hole in the music genre and insert himself into it so he stands out amongst the crowd. He doesn't want to just keep making the same generic rap songs that everyone else does, whether that makes him money or not. Ruby wants to move on from all of this, to look back and laugh at it all. But he's not quite there yet. He proceeds to end his verse, i.e. his story within the Soulseek narrative, with,
Got a snake skin bell around my fucking neck, but I broke the fucking buckle.
in the book of Genesis, the snake represents temptation that causes the downfall of humanity. Ruby has had the temptation of drugs and money around his neck, choking him, but he was able to break the buckle and free himself from that temptation, leading him to be able to pursue his true calling within the music career and prevent his own downfall. The story of the Suicide Boys is one unique to them, but the general narrative of the Soulseek saga is one we can all relate to. The idea of having problems and then coming to peace with those problems, either in a positive way that allows you to get your life back on track and pursue your dreams, or in a negative way that perpetuates your issues, yet still pushing on in spite of them. The Soulseek saga is truly a beautiful track with a great message, again, in my opinion.
This EP dropped quietly, and even 7 years later, it's still highly underrated, with barely anyone talking about it online. The one music video released for this tape only amassed 3 million views, which is low relative to their other music videos. This EP is a gem hidden amongst diamonds as it dropped in 2015. This was a massive year for the boys, with such drops as Southside Suicide coming out the same year. Soulseek was simply overshadowed. 2015 is widely regarded as the golden age of the Suicide Boys. However, that's a story for another time. Mwah. Yeah, fellas. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, leave a video reply. Later.